Quick introduction of Dean Garrett. He joined the University of Southern California, Marshall School of Business as Dean Robert R. Dockson's Dean's Chair in Business Administration and Professor of Management and Organization. Dean Garrett becomes the 18th Dean of Marshall School, which is celebrating its centennial year in 2021. So this is our big year, and Dean Garrett to join and make this year is even more special for us. Dean Garrett assumed this role on July 1st, 2020, after 6 years as a Dean of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Dean Garrett rejoins the USC, having taught here between 2005 and 2008 as a professor of international relations, business administration, communications, and law, while also serving as the president of the Pacific Council on International Policy. Additionally, Dean Garrett's previous administrative appointment includes service as a Dean of Business School at both the University of Sydney, where he was also founding CEO of the United States Studies Center, and UNSW Australia as a co-founding Dean of the International Institute, as well as Vice Provost of International Studies at UCLA. Dean Garrett is a member of Board of Directors of the Park Hotels, Resorts, and also serves as advisory board of the Indian School of Business and Shanghai Advanced Institute of Finance and Jinshu University School of Economics and Management. A distinguished international political economist, Dean Garrett has held academic appointments at Oxford, Stanford, and Yale University. He is fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a winner of Foreign Policy Association Medal, and the Advanced Global Australian Award. Dean Garrett is a LinkedIn influencer whose blog is widely followed by academic, business, and thought leaders. His expertise on world politics, business, and global economy, as well as on the US-China relationship, is highly sought after by major media organizations around the world. So certainly, I think his views in the context of supply chain disruptions to the COVID, as well as the US-China relationship, I'm so honored to having part of this USC Marshall team. And certainly, Dean Garrett has been an extreme good friend of supply chain, both the center and our master's program. Dean Garrett holds Bachelor's of Arts honors from the Australian National Universities and MA and PhD from Duke Universities, where he was a Fulbright scholar. So it is my pleasure to welcome Dean Garrett to address our Supply Chain Director Conference. Dean Garrett.
Thanks, Nick. And of course, I wince at those really long introductions, and it just reminds me how old I am, that I've done these various things during my career. I want to thank everyone for being part of this conference, and to Nick and his team for USC's leadership. I'm really pleased to be here today. I know your conference is mostly about sort of how we should do educational programs, how we should innovate them in the supply chain area. And I think that's really, really important. But as my bio suggests, I'm not an expert in supply chain, and I'm also what I would call an outside-in person. I tend to start at the macro and then ask the question, what does that mean for us in universities? So let me make 3 macro observations about supply chain before thinking about the 2 shocks to the system that I think we're experiencing at the same time, the COVID shock and the US-China rivalry. So the 3 things that I'd say about supply chains are this. 1, I really believe that the globalization of supply chains is the distinctive feature of the globalization that we've seen in the world since the 1980s. And, you know, I'm sure you all believe that, but I'm always struck when I look at the statistics on the growth of intermediate goods trade versus final goods trade, where intermediate goods have grown more than twice as fast as final goods, as you know, for a 30-year period, and all of that stuff compounds over time. So globalization is, I think, contemporary globalization has been, let me use the past, has been all about globalization of supply chains. If you ask the question why, I think the economics does say that it's about lower costs of moving goods, and in particular, the kind of container revolution that was made possible in the 1970s that we've exploited ever since. And of course, those of us who live in LA see that in terms of the number of ships trying to get into the port of LA Long Beach. So if supply chains globalize because of lower costs of moving goods, I think they had lots of consequences. This had lots of consequences. And, I'm a political scientist by training, and I actually think, there were a lot of debates about whether you could have war in a period of deep global entanglements. And people who think you can look back at the pre-World War I period and say, hey, Germany and the UK traded a lot together, but it didn't stop them going to war. I really think that the global supply chains have created enormous geopolitical stability in the world in the past 20 years, just because their tentacles have enwrapped not only the US and China, but most other parts of the world economy. And, I'm a bit of an economic determinist, and I think the economic costs of war have just been so high, and largely because of supply chains. So I spoke too long on that topic, but it's one I'm passionate about. So the first thing to say about supply chains is globalization of supply chains. Second thing to say is just the intimate two-way relationship between technology change, technology disruption, and supply chains. And, when I think about that, I think both about the importance of predictive analytics, AI, and the like on both supply and demand. If you're in a logistics business, managing inventories is just critical, and the use of advanced analytics there to not only to manage the supply chain, but to predict demand, and in particular where demand is just an extraordinary story, I think. And then equally important, we think about the robots taking a lot of jobs. One place where robotics has obviously been transformative, but I think we've got a long way to go, is just in how warehouses work. Sounds a bit prosaic, but you all know, and I'm certainly blown away when I look at the video of just how robotic a fulfillment center, for example, is these days. It's just incredible to look at. So the second thing I'd say about supply chains is their intimate two-way relationship with technology. And then the last thing is that, maybe we wouldn't have thought about this as part of supply chain, but I certainly do today, which is the end of retail, retail on Main Street might be a little bit hyperbolic, but obviously the balance between delivery to stores and delivery to homes is just tilted massively in terms of delivery to homes, and that just creates a whole new supply chain, a final link in the supply chain that wasn't there before. So for those three reasons, I'm really confident that supply chain is just one of the most important things, one of the most important features of the contemporary economy. But we're living right now in a world in which there are two simultaneous shocks to supply chains. The first one is the transformation of the US-China relationship from one in which more economic engagement was just the reality. I'm going to say that period was, let's call it 1990 to 2015, to one now where everywhere what you see is US-China rivalry, not only geopolitically, but also economically. That's a big deal because so much of the global supply chain hinged on using China. And then the second thing, of course, is COVID and the rise of resilient supply chains. I know this is going to be a really big deal for the Biden administration and for governments all around the world. And it's a really big deal because it's real and important. We're going to be talking about resilient supply chains, shorter supply chains. I think we're going to be talking about industrial policies within countries to insource rather than outsource production. Obviously, there are real challenges raised by both of those things, but incredible opportunities too. So let me just mention one thing on the challenge side and then one thing on the opportunity side. With respect to challenges, I was saying to Nick the other day, somewhat tongue in cheek, I just didn't know how important semiconductors were to Ford pickup trucks until recently, right? With the fact that Ford had to stop production because they didn't have enough semiconductors. Now, we know the semiconductor story is really complicated with national security implications, Taiwan, China, the US, all involved. But I was just struck that the world of semiconductors isn't only in high tech. It affects Main Street vehicle production and demand. And so having, again, Ford pickup trucks and semiconductors, who knew they were so tightly connected? That's on the challenges side. On the opportunity side, obviously, we're living in a world in which most firms outside China are going to be diversifying their supply chain away from China. Now, this was happening already because China just is no longer a low-cost assembler to the world, a low-cost factory to the world. The Chinese domestic production was changing dramatically, but obviously that move away from China as a low-cost assembler and factory to the world has just been accelerated by US-China rivalry. Who wins from that? Well, we all know about Vietnam. Anyone who had a factory in southern China now has a redundant factory in Vietnam, and you just look at how the Vietnamese economy is booming, in particular real estate prices, and it's really clear to see that effect. But I think in the coming years, we're going to see supply chain opportunities in places that historically we haven't thought about as being part of the global supply chain. So the two big players in Asia obviously are India and Indonesia. I think in both countries, this is a real opportunity. Closer to home, I was just on a call with somebody who's a Mexico expert, and we were talking about the opportunity that is being created in Mexico right now. Global investors, American investors are all looking at Mexico as a even more important part of the US supply chain. But of course, in Mexico, you also have to overcome the governance challenges, which is also true, of course, in India and Indonesia. So I think the opportunity is to diversify away from China. Lots of opportunities there, but you've got to navigate local conditions if you want to win. So let me end now by reflecting on something in a way that might be a little impolitic in this group. But I think it's fair to say that, back in the day, I don't know when that was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people who were interested in supply chain were kind of thought to be a bit boring and nerdy, right? I mean, you could be a logistics geek and we kind of knew it was important, but it wasn't very sexy. Well, today it's really sexy. Nothing could be more important, not only to the American economy, but to the global economy. And I think it's also an incredible opportunity for us in universities because of the amount of change that we can expect in the next 5 years. Disruption is a bit of a cliche, but nothing is more disrupted, I think, than the world of supply chain. And the challenge for us all, which is also an opportunity, is can we deliver education and thought leadership, not only to take advantage of this new world, but to shape it? And I know that's the challenge to which you're all rising. And I know that's what this conference is focused on. So, Nick, I'm going to end right there. I don't know whether I've spoken too long or too short, but I want to congratulate you and the USC team, not only for what all you do on campus, but for your leadership in this conference. And I want to welcome everybody else to it. I know we've got lots of universities represented, and it's great to see everybody. But I'll turn it back to you now, Nick.
You're on mute, Nick.
My favorite T-shirt of 2020. I saw one on the street the other day, the You're on Mute T-shirt. It's a wonderful thing.
Amazing how often we have to be reminded ourselves, are you speaking and not really on mute? All right, Dave, I know you have a question, but Jeff, before I pass it over to Dave, just a quick question. If you can briefly touch, after Dave's question, on the human capital, how do you see, because we are all academians here at the universities, we're looking at creating the next generations of leaders. If you can just touch briefly after Dave's question, which is human capital. How do you see post-COVID that piece different than past 1990 to 2015. So Dave, I'll actually turn it over to you first, and then.
Well, Nick, you actually covered my question because first of all, Jeff, thank you so much for your talk. But it's all about people, processes, and technology. And so the next point is how do we really do a better job at bringing the human capital into the supply chain? Because when I talk in my position at TCU, I work with industry and work with all the companies, and they're confused on how we as a human capital community can really deliver it effectively.
Yeah, Dave, it's a fantastic question. And let me start with this paradox. It appears paradoxical, but when you think about it more, I don't think it is, right? So we see more technology in everything, right? And you get McKinsey and Oxford saying 50% of jobs are going to be automated in the next decade, stories like that. And we immediately ask the question, what does that mean for humans? And, I guess I have what I see with respect to business education is three things that we need from humans now in a world in which machines, robots, technology are going to be more important. The first one is we've got to be the masters of the machines. That means that the hard skills, coding, analytics, data science, all that stuff is just going to be more and more important so we can take advantage of, not be intimidated by machines and technology. The second thing, and this is the paradox part, is that I think the soft skills and leadership are just more and more important because the more commoditized skills machines will do. So let me give you a non-supply chain example of this that I think about a lot, which is lawyers, right? So a lot of lawyering used to be looking up precedent, looking up regulations, looking up legislation. Well, we have no doubt that machines do that faster, better, and with fewer errors than humans. But that doesn't mean lawyers are irrelevant. The best jobs for lawyers today are being part of the deal team, where they're involved in strategy inputs at firms, not in looking up stuff. So that's the second element. And we could talk, what does leadership mean today? I think leading diversity is a core theme. I think our understanding of ethics has to be much broader than it used to be. But I think we're going to, the soft skills, I don't think we should use the term soft skills because I think they're more important than that. And then the last element, the newest element, I think is the consequence of the sheer uncertainty, unpredictability, and pace of change that we live in. I saw McKinsey has a new study where they talk about 3 Qs, not TQ, 2 Qs. So we knew about IQ and EQ. McKinsey has started to talk about AQ as well. And the A there is adaptability. So I think we need to think about our education so that we have enduring, adaptable, transferable skills that aren't tied to any one thing because the pace of disruption is too fast. So what's the future of human capital? I'll borrow McKinsey. I think it's some combination of IQ, let's call that hard skills, EQ, let's call that leadership, and AQ, let's call that adaptability under uncertainty. I think it's a big challenge, but I don't think, I don't think that makes us less relevant in universities. I actually think it makes us more relevant. And I think that, that professional education is going to become more and more important as everybody looks for more bang for the buck from their educational experience, right? it's got to be, it used to be kind of a dirty word to be pre-professional or to be career oriented. I think now and into the future, that's going to be a badge of honor, because that's what everyone is going to be looking at higher education for. I think we can increase our value proposition. But great topic.
Greatly appreciate that. We would love to take more questions, but I want to make sure we stay on the agenda.